Okay, I think we're gonna go ahead and get started. Hello, everyone. My name is Kyle. I am from the Community and Partner Engineering team at CircleCI. I am more of a user of what we're going to be talking about today, the CircleCI API v2 Insights endpoint. We're going to be talking about how to get more information about the pipelines that you are running on CircleCI, most notably and most requested, the number of credits that you are consuming. We'll go over that as well. So let's go ahead and get started. To really understand the API, we first have to really understand what we're talking about in CircleCI and what makes up our pipelines and what a pipeline is. So if you are using the new UI, you're already familiar with what we are taking a look at. Every time you push a commit to your repository, you are generally going to be firing off a pipeline. And a pipeline is composed of a number of workflows. You may only have one, you may have multiple. In this image, you can see in one of our own projects, we have a pipeline that is kicked off every single time we push a commit. And when we do that, we fire off 3 separate workflows, and we'll take a look at what those are in a moment. But the important thing to note is that this is pipeline number 990, and it is composed of these 3 workflows. Let's go down a little bit deeper. So each of those workflows is composed of jobs. So if we were to expand that, what we were just looking at, we can see that in the service workflow, it is composed of a number of jobs. These may be running sequentially or they may be running asynchronously, but there's a number of jobs that need to complete in order for that workflow to complete. These may also have some kind of filter on them, or they may be scheduled. So if you were to have a workflow that only runs on your deploy, maybe that only runs on the master branch, or maybe it only runs on a scheduled release, something like that. And of course, we just said when you dial in a workflow, we can see these number of jobs here. So we'll go a little bit deeper and take a look at what is a job. A job is a collection of steps, things you want to do, executable actions, and they take place in some kind of environment. So on this job page, we can see that we are actually using the Docker executor with the medium resource class. That's 2 processors and 4 gigs of RAM. And within that execution environment, we are running some set of steps. You will always see at the top there, we have our spin up environment. If you were to click into that, you would see that it's loading up Docker. And then you're performing some action within those steps. Maybe that's testing your code, maybe that's deploying, or anything else you need to do within that environment. And with every one of those jobs, you are consuming some amount of compute resources. And depending on what environment that is, what executor you are on, and how long the job is running, you'll use a different amount of credits. Most commonly, you'll be on the Docker executor. By default, you're on the medium resource class. So you could take a look at our pricing page if you want to dive in deeper to see what you can do to kind of lower your credit consumption if possible, or just get an idea of what the different credit consumptions are. But what we're going to do now is take a look at this new V2 API, and specifically the insights endpoint of that API, so that we can start getting some information on our pipelines and really see, well, we'll go into it. We'll see what we can get out of that, see what kind of things we can make more efficient out of it. Possibly you could get some trend lines out of this, whatever you need to do. So here's a quick breakdown: track status, monitor duration, optimize consumption. Basically, we're just going over. This is going to give you the ability to really get into that. So let's take a look. At first, what you're going to need to do is go to the API endpoint. That's circleci.com/API/v2. And we are talking about that insights endpoint. And from there on, we're going to have a few different, what do we call these, sub endpoints? Slugs after that. So we have our project slug, which in our case looks like this. We are using a GitHub project. That could be GH or GitHub, by the way. That is dynamic like that. You can use either term. If you are on Bitbucket, you could use Bitbucket or BB. Then the organization name and the project name, followed by workflows. There is, you're going to have to add workflows in there. There is nothing to the top level pipeline endpoint yet. We have to look into the items of this endpoint. So every pipeline has some number of workflows. So we'll feed in the workflows endpoint. We'll get back a summary of aggregated metrics for the last 250 runs of those workflows, or the last 90 days. It depends on what comes in first. but you can see the window start and window end date here. This is also paginated, so you can go back now. So let's take a look at what this actually gives us. Here we go. So the result gives us this metrics object, and this is an aggregate of all of the metrics for this integration test prod release workflow. This is one of the workflows that we have for this particular pipeline. And we can see the success rate, how many runs of it have been included in this date range that we're discussing, and a few different other pieces of information. But I think what we all really want to see is the total number of credits used. So within these 2 runs, we can see that we've used 43 credits. And in the next few slides, we're going to drill down a little bit deeper to see how we can get a little bit more specific information. If we were to keep going down, you can see that this particular project actually has another workflow as well. So it's pretty much the same information, just continuing on. I just want to note, I do see some questions in there. I'm just going to run through this real quick, and then we'll come back to the questions. So let's go a little bit deeper. We talked about how we had 2 workflows showing in there. So what we're going to do is, after going to workflows, we're going to go ahead and insert the name of any of the workflows we want to drill down into a little bit deeper. So I'm going to go into that integration test prod release workflow in the same API endpoint. We're just going a little bit deeper. And what we're going to get back is the ID of that workflow per run. So we're going to get back the ID, the status, how long it ran, and again, we're actually going to get the number of credits for that particular run. So now we're no longer looking at the aggregate total. We're actually getting information about each specific run of that workflow. And of course, we're probably wondering, how can we go a little bit deeper? We need to get even more information. No problem. So now that we have the workflow name and we can see the runs of the workflow, let's actually go a little bit deeper. Sorry. Here we go. And check out the jobs of that workflow. We talked about earlier how every workflow is composed of a number of jobs. So if we type in that workflow name and then tack on /jobs, we're going to get even further information about that particular workflow. So we're in integration test prod release /jobs. Let's see what kind of jobs are in there. We see we have integration test -1. And another one here that is actually from an orb. That's a whole other concept we could dive into, but this is our basically our deploy job right here. And we can see the individual runs of those particular jobs as well, and the individual amounts of credits used. So this is another aggregate. You'll see what we have is the same metrics that we had when we were looking at all of our workflows, but now we're looking at all of our jobs. So at this aggregate, we're just seeing similar information, but at a lower level. But of course, we want to go deeper. We want to look at individual runs of those particular jobs. So we're going to go ahead and go 1 deeper. Here we go. We just were at /jobs, which showed us all of the jobs within that workflow and then the aggregate information. Now we'll actually plug in the job name, just like we plugged in the workflow name earlier. And we can see the individual usage per job. So credits used 16, that particular status. And what we're at now is the most specific level. So if we were to work our way back up, that's how we get our aggregate information. So you can see basically if we're at this job name, we can see that we're using 16 credits. We know that we want to see how many credits that job has used in aggregate. All we have to do is go back to jobs to get that information, and then we can work our way back up the pipeline. It's a name-based API that will get you information at those different levels. And we can run through this again or answer any questions, of course. But if you are looking for some highly specific information, of course, we have our documentation available. Feel free to check that out at the link. And of course, we're going to have the deck provided. Want to say thank you for taking a look, but of course, that's not all. We want to ask you your questions. I saw some come in earlier, so we're definitely going to work our way back up through those. And then, of course, if you have any questions that aren't currently asked, please feel free to type them in. We're going to take a look at those now. Let's see. Is there any plan to provide a user interface in CircleCI that is backed up by the new Insights API? Yes, there absolutely is. That is coming a little bit delayed. That will be coming, but is not going to release at the same time as the new UI, although the old UI is still available, so you can still get to the Insights page for that. There's going to be an entirely new Insights UI built on this new API, so keep a lookout for that. We're also trying to work with some of our partners, data logging companies that are specialize in taking in this information and then visualizing it. You may use that in aggregate with some other tools that you use outside of CircleCI. So keep a lookout for some data visualization partners that may be integrating with us as well. Thank you for that. Is there an endpoint which returns all valid project slubs? Yes, there is. We were taking a look at the Insights API specifically, and can I go backwards here? Let's just actually go here. Okay, so we're taking a look at the /insights project, /insights endpoint here. We have additional V2 endpoints. I would take a look at the documentation as well, but what you can do is get a list of all projects that way, then take the results of that and feed it back into here. So the endpoints exist to get all this information, but I think to get maybe to the heart of the question is there is no one endpoint to get all of the information at once. You can go to one endpoint to get a list of projects, and then you can take those projects and feed it into Insights to get information about each specific project. And again, depending on what data you want, you take the project, you put it right here, Insights /project slug /workflows, and that gets you your aggregate information. Then go drill down deeper to get information about specific jobs within that workflow or specific runs of those jobs within that workflow. So it gets more specific from there. Can you explain more about how credits work? Yeah, if you have any specific questions, I'd love to go into that, but what we can actually do, probably go into the pricing page. But before we do that, let's just take a look at the example we have here. So when you are on CircleCI, you may or may not be aware you are using a resource class. Now, if you haven't messed with your resource class at all, as in you've left it the default setting, what you're actually getting is the Docker Linux medium resource class, assuming you're using Docker. We also have available the Linux virtual machine, we have the Windows virtual machine, and Mac OS, which of course is also a virtual machine. So each different execution environment consumes a different number of credits. And if you're familiar with any credit consumption for compute, right? So for every minute that a machine is being utilized, you are consuming a number of credits. And that can change as well, not just by what execution environment you are in, such as Docker, which is the least expensive, Mac OS, Windows, and the virtual machine, but it also can change with the resource class. So let's take a look at this. Docker Linux. So by default, you will always be using the medium resource class, which means you will have access to 2 CPUs and 4 gigabytes of memory. And that is going to result in a cost of 10 credits per minute that those jobs are spun up. So if you have one job and it runs for 1 minute and it's on the default Docker resource, it would cost you 10 credits. So then you can, this is a sliding scale. If you have a very small job, maybe something that's running Alpine Linux, maybe it's only pinging a curl request, maybe you're only sending a notification or something, you don't really need access to 4 gigs of RAM, you might want to drop that down to the small environment, and then you can consume half as many credits. Or if you have a really large like Android application that requires a lot of memory, because Android requires a lot of memory, so you might need to scale that up to large or extra large and get yourself that 16 gigs of RAM or even higher. And then, like we said, we had those other execution environments as well. So it's all just going to be a difference of credits. Now, what you really want to do now, I'm glad you asked this. Thank you. We're really getting into the meat of this. When you're taking a look at these aggregates, so let's say I'm taking a look at this project and I see that I have these workflows, right? And I can see how many credits they are using. And if I want to go a little bit deeper, try and figure out, okay, is there something I can optimize here? Let's get into a specific workflow. And we can see, okay, when this workflow ran this time, it ran 19 credits, but last time it ran, it consumed 24 credits. So something in this workflow took longer than this workflow. And what I'm almost certain this is, without even looking, as you can notice, there's only 2 here. So this can almost certainly be explained by, this is probably making use of caching. So if you imagine if you are running a node application, the first time you run it, there will of course be no cache for your node modules. And if you were to utilize caching, you can shave a few credits off how much time is being spent because you're not re-downloading those node modules every single time. So if you are not currently using caching, this is a pretty good example of why you would want to make sure that you're implementing proper caching as often as possible, just to try and shave some minutes off your build time. All right, I hope that answered the credit question. I'm gonna move on to the next one. Is there an insights endpoint to get info on caches? That's an interesting question. I'd have to ask for a little bit more information there. I can tell you no, but I'm not entirely sure what we're looking for there. Within your CircleCI config, you can specify a cache key. I'm sorry, I don't have anything on screen for this particular question, but your cache is validated. Oh man, we should really go into this, but that's a whole other topic. In your CircleCI config, you can specify a cache key, and as long as, if you have like a package JSON file, for instance, if that file is not updated, it will continue to utilize the same cache bucket. If you update your package JSON file, assuming you've set it up this way, then it will clear the cache and you will have to re-download your modules. So if you are in active development, you're adding a lot of new different files to your dependencies, you may not be making use of cache, but once you get into a pretty good workflow, your project is a little bit more stable and you're not actually adding more dependencies, you should be hitting your cache more or less pretty consistently. There's a chance of your cache clearing, but it's not super frequent that would happen. And please let me know if we can get any more specific on that question. We'll move on to the next one. I know it's not available, but insights on actual usage of the node would be a great addition. Do I need XL2 or could I use? Okay, so I think I see what you're saying. And this is a pretty valid question as well. So I think what you're asking is, could we see, for instance, how much memory we're using within a particular container? That's a good request. I'm gonna pass that up to our product team. We definitely don't have anything such as how much memory you've used. I will say that if you contact the support team, there is a chance we can get you that information. Maybe not in aggregate, but we can kind of get that information. You can also SSH into a machine at runtime, and probably you can run. I'm not sure if top will actually work for reasons that get complicated with Docker containers, but you can actually look into how much memory you're using by SSHing into the machine. And yes, I see you have clarified CPU and memory usage. Yeah, we're definitely gonna look into that. We'll add that to the suggestion list. It's a great suggestion. Can we explain more about orbs? Yeah, that is again a larger topic that we do have some other content on, but we'll do a quick dive there. Basically, when you are writing a config for CircleCI, you are defining these jobs and workflows and steps that we were talking about. And if you have multiple projects that share the same job, so in fact, let's go take a look at, where was that job? Right here, right? Okay, so if we have a job that we need to do fairly frequently, and in this particular example, what we're taking a look at is in the project slug, we were talking about CircleCI -public /serverless framework orb. What we're actually looking at right now, this example that we're all taking a look at, is the CI/CD pipeline that we use for developing orbs. So we recently developed an orb for the serverless framework orb. And because we develop a lot of orbs, they all deploy the same way. We have a CLI command for deploying orbs. And because we develop these orbs a lot, we need some way to use that command in multiple projects. We don't really want to have to define it multiple times. So we've come up with essentially a package manager for CircleCI config. Really happy to talk, but I am on the CPE team. That is definitely my role. So I'm very happy to talk about that all day, but happy to leave some extra information on that as well. But basically you can import config into your config so that you can use it in multiple projects. So we have this orbs tool orb, that's the name of the package, and it comes with a job that is automatically deploying our orbs for us with some fancy parameters and things like that. So this particular job here in the API would be interesting to see, if our success rate of deploy was not 100%, I'd be curious to see why one of our deployments failed, see if there's something we can do to, fix that situation, and see if it did fail, did it consume a lot of credits when it failed, or is there some way that we can create fail safeties around that? But since everything did go well, really what we're just getting a look at here is some aggregate information. We only have 2 runs, so this isn't very complex information, but you can see like the minimum amount of duration, the maximum amount of duration, and see what we can do to try and shovel that number closer to that minimum number. We talked about before, since this only has 2 runs, we were almost certainly seeing a longer first run due to not having cache, followed by a much shorter run due to having cache. So it's a very, very crucial example of how to utilize that. All right. I think that is all of the, oh, do we have one more? Here we go. Regarding recent project runs, this workflow endpoint, okay, hold on here. Is it possible to see how it was triggered? Ooh, that's a good one. Not through the Insights API. However, can you see that in the, I'm almost positive you can see that in the Jobs API. So what we're talking about right here in the Insights API, the Insights API is only going to give you information, kind of like aggregate information about analytics. If you want to get more specific information about the job, and in fact, I am going to pull up, let's go ahead and pull up the API page. Should be, was it this page? Nope. Let's pull this up. So take a look at our documentation here, the API v2 documentation. We're taking a look at insights today, but this information is just to get metrics and analytics around the jobs and their credits and usage like that. But you can get more specific information about the job itself and like what actually occurred within that job using our other endpoints. So here is the job endpoint, and we should be able to see in here. Well, so just to talk about what we are seeing, for instance, if you had parallelism enabled, you can get that out of here. Here's the executor. So if you wanted to know, hey, this job consumed a lot of credits, what executor did it use? Well, now we can go in and say, okay, it used the Docker executor and it used this resource class. We can get that kind of specific job level information. Do we have the triggerer is a good question. I'm almost certain it is in here, but I would say take a look at the other endpoints that we have available besides just the Insights endpoint, and really think of Insights endpoint at the moment. It's really great for getting a high overview of your pipelines and the number of credits they're consuming to kind of give you that idea of what you can do to optimize those runs on a high level. But then we have all this much deeper information that you can get to through these other endpoints as well. Hope that answers your question. All right, give it another moment to see if any more questions want to come through. If you have any burning questions, please send them in. Other than that, thank you for attending and really appreciate it.